Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this concurrence vote on House Bill 962. Mr. Speaker, just by way of background, this bill amends Title 42 to provide that if an individual entitled to bring a civil action for child sexual abuse was under the age of 18 at the time the crime occurred, the individual will have a period of 37 years after attaining the age of 18 in which to commence an action for damages. The effect of this bill is prospective only. The extension of the civil statute of limitations is not retroactive. Sadly, this bill will not revive lawsuits that were barred by the statute of limitations prior to enactment of the bill, Mr. Speaker. These victims are still excluded from seeking civil justice against their abusers and the institutions that allowed their abuse to happen in the first place. Mr. Speaker, without a doubt, one of the most significant dangers facing youth across America is sexual abuse, and these numbers are chilling. According to the U.S. Justice Department, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before they turn 18 years old. And I'm sorry to say that these numbers are low. In the U.S., there's over 40 million survivors of child sexual abuse. 1/3 of the victims of child sexual abuse will never tell anyone about their sexual abuse. Many of these innocent victims spend years and sometimes a lifetime in silence or in therapy. Sometimes their lives are punctuated by periods of substance abuse and failed relationships in an effort to find solace or to come to grips with their sexual victimization. Mr. Speaker, as we've learned while studying ways to find justice for those sexually abused as children, victims of child sexual abuse require longer periods of time than our current laws allow to come forward. This population is what current law refers to as a special victim population. Many victims will never come forward. And Mr. Speaker, why would they? If they miss the statute of limitations, they're out of luck and they can't sue or see their abuser prosecuted. A few years back, my friend, our former colleague, Representative Louise Bishop from West Philadelphia, bravely and courageously revealed publicly for the first time that she was raped as a young girl at the age of 12. This is before World War II. It took 66 years for this educated and dignified woman to find the strength to share her story. Her story ripped open some very painful wounds, but it did something else, Mr. Speaker. It served to encourage other victims to come forward. Mr. Speaker, 2 of our brothers in this body today have also shown great courage and strength by sharing their own personal stories of victimization. And we know that those numbers are low, too. This problem will never go away until we allow victims more time to take their cases to the courtroom. By continuing to deny victims an opportunity to come forward in a civil court and be heard, we enable perpetrators of child sexual abuse to get away with violent crimes against children. Coming forward and admitting that they were victims of sexual abuse requires a great deal of courage and strength on the part of the victims. Such an admission reopens painful wounds, but it can also encourage other victims to come forward. Mr. Speaker, legions of victims of child sex abuse will tell you that when they were finally ready to talk to a prosecutor or to a lawyer, the criminal and civil statute of limitations had already expired. Across the United States, one victim after another has been surprised by these cruel and arbitrary legal deadlines. This delayed discovery is often the result of emotional and psychological trauma and is often accompanied by repression of the memory of sexual abuse, a type of post-traumatic stress disorder, if you will. Child victims frequently do not even come to grips with the relationship of their injuries to their abuse until well into adulthood, and frequently during the course of counseling and therapy. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. The ability of victims to sue is about justice, not money. It's also about accountability of institutions that covered up child sexual abuse or enabled abusers to commit their crimes against innocent children. For most victims, civil lawsuits are the only remedy, not only against their abuser, but also an organization if it enabled the abuse. In this regard, the right to sue should be expanded, not constrained. In addition, the person who suffered child sexual abuse should never be limited in filing a civil lawsuit, regardless of whether or not criminal charges have been filed. Mr. Speaker, before we pat ourselves on the back today about helping victims of child sex abuse, remember that we still need to reform our statute of limitations laws so that victims who miss the statute of limitation can open cases and find justice. Those who had their civil claims rejected because of the statute of limitations should be allowed to open a window to open their cases. Such an action will still require a victim to prove their victimization. But in many cases of victims of Catholic priests, Catholic archives have all the proof needed to prove that a particular priest sexually abused an innocent child, and that church leadership usually found out about it, yet did nothing, except maybe move the priest to another parish or send him on retreat. The institutional cover-ups, Mr. Speaker, have made these terrible situations even worse. And it's a sad day when concern for institutional risk management trumps uncovering the truth. But this bill is not about the Catholic Church. It's about affording victims of child sex abuse a small measure of justice. We owe this action to all those who learned as adults that those awful memories they suppressed were indeed horrible crimes. Our job here is to make sure the law is written to help these victims find justice. We should be compelled by our collective conscience, Mr. Speaker, and by the public trust we hold to act on behalf of the victims until the perpetrators have been punished and justice has been served. The pain and the shame, both for the victims and for any institutions involved, will never go away as long as the window remains closed tightly, preventing the truth from coming to light and maintaining the current restrictive statute of limitations for child sex abuse victims. Mr. Speaker, it's time to open the window. We need to open the window and allow the light of truth to shine in this dark place. Anything less is justice denied. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.